Hi, I'm Liron Cohen.
And I'm Mimi Torchin.
And you're listening to Lady Parts TV, the podcast.
Whee!
Hi, everybody.
Hey there.
We are back. Happy to see you. No, we're not seeing you.
No, we're not seeing them.
Happy to talk to you.
And they're not seeing us,
this.
which is probably a good thing.
But you look beautiful.
Oh, thank you. I have hair down the middle of my back. Not growing from the middle
It's
of my back. It is in the middle of my back, the very back part of it.
Mine is in the middle of my
but
back.
Yours
is barely
long.
past your shoulders.
Mine started off in a short haircut. Okay, now on to the
business of today. Our stats, I didn't give them to you.
No,
Interesting
you never
stats this time. We tallied 43 primetime shows, out of which written or co-written by women 30, which is 70%, which is quite amazing.
Amazing.
But directed by a woman 11, which is 25%.
Okay.
And we didn't even count one of the shows that we're talking about today, which was all men all the time.
Yes.
Because it was the same men.
It was the same man. Both.
It was practically
the same
a movie
men.
in chapters.
Yes, it's
Yes.
exactly what it was.
Yeah, so
which
we'll get to
he
that in
even
a
said
second.
in an interview.
We'll get to that in a minute, but before that, we have a couple of movies to tell you about.
Yeah.
And the first one is...
It's called Endangered Species. It's available for rent on all platforms and for purchase on DVD and Blu-ray now. This is a film about really dumb tourists, okay? Really about the stupidest people.
And let me tell you, living in New York and on Martha's Vineyard, we see them a lot.
Yeah, we see
dumb
lots.
tourists.
But these people go to Africa, and I'll tell you who they are in a second.
When you're a dumb tourist in New York or on Martha's Vineyard, it can't really kill you, but
Well,
it can in
if
Africa.
you're dumb enough. But yeah, they go to Africa on a dream safari with their, it's a couple, their two adult children, and the boyfriend of one of them. And they go into the bush without a guide for reasons which they explain sort of conveniently. The movie is starring Rebecca Romijn, who is really quite wonderful, and Jerry O'Connell, who I believe she's married to, and Philip Winchester, who you would know from the Law and Order franchise.
It's also, by the way, directed by a woman
And
Jake
written by a
Bassett, and
woman.
written by her and her daughter,
Her and her
Isabel
daughter,
Bassett.
right.
So that's really cool.
So that's a big plus and a reason to watch. Here's the thing about this movie is you can see everything coming a mile away. The main incident is that they drive their, very early on in their safari, they drive and see a big, gorgeous, I'm sure, CGI,
of course,
rhinoceros. And what they don't realize until they look to the other side of the car and see a precious baby rhino, and really there's hardly anything cuter, that they realize they've come between the mother and the baby, and the mother proceeds to ram them and knock the car over. There's so many things that happen. I'll just give you one. As they're getting ready to go, the people from the safari place come and give them a 12-pack of water in plastic bottles. And the daughter comes over and she says, no, we're not littering. We're not using more plastic. I have glass bottles here, which they take to the car, clanking and clinking. And you know that the minute that car turns over, there's not going to be any water. Rebecca Romijn's character has diabetes. And you see her taking out her little vials of insulin. I mean, their arrogance.
Well, as I also, when we talked about it, I said it sounds like a disaster movie only in Safari, like the disaster movies and all the things
exactly
that they do. And I let me, though, just say I didn't see this movie because to me, anything that has to do with animals, animals getting hurt, animals being maligned for being in nature and doing what they're supposed to be doing, it bothers me deeply. How did you feel about that aspect?
I don't think they maligned the animals too much. I think the animals behaved as they were meant to behave, and that was
but was
pretty
it clear?
Obvious. Yes, I thought it was pretty clear. And the other thing about this safari,
because when it's animal versus man, I will usually support the animal.
There was one me too. One very big surprise that I loved, and I will not even foreshadow it in any way. And it was a surprise, and it was cool. The other thing is this was a pretty lame park because they only saw 4 different animals, I think.
Well,
I think I
that's-
saw about every. I certainly saw the big 5 and a whole lot others. The first 4 hours
Well,
that
they-
I was in
they
the
couldn't
Ngorongoro
CGI that
crater,
many animals.
which was our first. Well, they did shoot it in Africa.
So what do you think? Do you recommend Endangered
I'll
Species?
tell you what. If you like survival movies, it made me think a little bit of the Sands of Kalahari, which, unless you're my age, you've never even heard of, which is someone getting stranded and alone in the Kalahari Desert. If you like these sort of survival things, see how people, MacGyver themselves.
See how stupid people act stupidly and then have to rescue themselves.
Right.
Okay. Got it.
It's a wonderful place to shoot this. I love the idea of it, and I think it teaches you some important lessons, and I really enjoyed it.
Okay. Endangered Species.
Endangered Species.
Available now. Our second movie that we're talking about today is called American Traitor, The Trial of Axis Sally. It is available in select theaters and on demand now, directed by Michael Polish and written by Vance Owen and Daryl Hicks. I can read to you the whole grocery list of actors, but you won't recognize any of them except for Al Pacino,
Yes.
who seems to be
and Mitch Pileggi, but he had a pretty small role.
Al Pacino, I think, was like their whole budget for casting, and then they had to cast the budget, which I was surprised about because actually they cast a virtually unknown for the lead, Meadow Williams, and I found that she was the weakest link in this movie.
It's a shame too because it's the kind of role that there are 10,000 women in SAG right now who could have played this role probably better.
Yeah, it was surprising to me that they would go with her. Not because she was an unknown, but because she really was.
She might know someone.
Maybe. Anyway, this is a true story of Mildred Gillers, who is an American woman who, at the time of the beginning of World War II, was living in Berlin. She was trying to become a Broadway star in New York, couldn't make it, and had quite a nice career for herself in Berlin. And she became the lead propaganda radio announcer / singer / all sorts of things.
You see her in all war, hear her in every war movie about World War II.
And there was the radio station that she broadcast on for the Third Reich. Many soldiers listened to it. American soldiers, many American families were listening to it. And she was doing propaganda for Nazi Germany.
Yeah.
So after the war, she was caught and was brought to the U.S. for trial. And Al Pacino is her lawyer. Nobody wanted to defend her, and Al Pacino is the kind of guy who agreed to defend her, pretty much the only guy. And it was a weird little film because
it was odd.
It was. The story was good. The story was interesting. But the film itself was, I mean, we stuck with it. It didn't bore us. It's just that there was something very underwhelming about it.
Yes.
And again, I think that the leading lady being very uncharismatic contributed to the fact that it was kind of like, I don't know, am I liking this film or am I not liking this film?
It felt slow, and a lot of it because she had very little affect.
She had very little affect, and at the same time, she overacted many times as
yes.
well. So she felt unreal.
But I didn't hate her.
No,
I was
didn't
kind
either.
of fascinated
And
by her. She was like a real person.
She got better with time. I also think that there were a few, not in a funny way, but a few punchlines that they really held back on. A few things that when we discovered should have been more of a big deal, had more of an emotional impact, and the way that they were done was almost even kind of with the same tone as the rest of the movie. So there were a lot of mistakes made with the film, but still, it wasn't bad. We didn't hate it to the point. I have very little patience, and I stuck with it. The subject matter was interesting, and the story was interesting.
Was something that we sort of know peripherally about, but knew nothing about.
And they managed to get me to shift alliances throughout the movie, which I think is an accomplishment. They obviously did something right.
Yes.
And
it looked good.
And Al Pacino, the lawyer, was written well. I liked the final. Unless they just picked it up one by one, one for the original trial. But I found his closing argument to be very effective, and so. It's kind of a lukewarm recommendation, but nevertheless, it's a recommendation.
But if you can, I wouldn't risk my health to go to the
don't
theater
go to the
for
theater.
It. But if you can find it
on demand.
On demand, it's a a short and
worth your time.
not an uninteresting show.
And again, I'm to me, you can tell stories about World War II from now until forever, and you will never run out of interesting stories. So this is American Traitor: The Trial of Axis Sally. Axis Sally was her nickname, by the way, and it is available now. So check it out.
Okay, now here is something that I just almost don't know what to say about. And I'll tell you what it is. It's Lisey's story. Her name is Lisa, so it's called Lisey's Story. From a Stephen King, it's on now, started yesterday, on Apple TV+. Stephen King, who wrote the novel, wrote all, it's the only thing that he's written. He wrote all 8 episodes since The Shining. It's kind of a typical Stephen King thing, and I have to say that I was absolutely mesmerized by it. I was obsessed with it, even though I hate that word. I couldn't get it out of my head.
Well, you literally were obsessed with it.
Yes. If I could have watched it, all 8 episodes at once, I would have. As it is, I think I watched them in 2 or 3 sittings.
Now let me just give you the counter review. I hated it so much I barely stayed through the first episode, and I was on my phone the entire time, and Mimi watched the rest of them by herself.
Yes.
That's the counter review.
Now, I have a counter review too. Julianne Moore. It has a fabulous cast. Julianne Moore, Joan Allen, Jennifer Jason Leigh, who play sisters, Clive Owen, who is is the writer, the Stephen King stand-in, who's married to Julianne Moore, and Dane DeHaan, who I wanted to murder from the first sight. I mean, he's the villain. He's the worst kind of villain, the kind of villains I hate the most. A deranged, a psychopath, evil, mean, just hideous, and I cannot bear that kind of a villain.
Yeah, villains are so much more interesting when they have multiple facets and are interesting.
He had no redeeming qualities. He was vicious. He really was dangerous, and he gets no quarter for being mentally ill. He knew what he was doing when he was doing it. And so that's one of the very big negatives for me. But King often does that. And the main thing about this movie, it feels like a big long movie, which, let me just say, it's about a lot of interesting things. It's about the importance of family, how you pull together, you stay together. It's about the terrible, terrible toll a bad childhood has on someone for the rest of their lives. It's
mental illness.
Didn't I say that?
Well, you said it about Dan DeHaan, but...
No. It's very much about mental illness, and it has, in general, a lot of empathy and sympathy, and it's very kind. Joan Allen's character has a lot of problems, but she's probably my second favorite character in the story. She's just wonderful. It's about a lot of important things. The acting was excellent. It looks good. But there is a fantasy place called Booyah Moon that the writer, who is, again, as I say, a stand-in for Stephen King, he's a horror writer. He has very, very devoted fans. He fills up stadiums with people who come to hear him speak. In order to escape the brutality of his childhood, he invented this place, which is in equal parts beautiful and creepy beyond belief. And it was eye-rolling to me. It induced so much eye-rolling in me because I couldn't accept it. And Stephen King, in a New York Times interview, said, when the director asked him, and the director said, now this Booyah Moon, it's not real, right? It's just in his head. He said, no, it's real. It maybe wasn't real before he created it as a child, but it's real to him, and it's real to the other people who managed to transport themselves there. That was something I really could never do, and it caused a lot of kind of anger in me because it took away this thing that had me totally involved. The mood is very good. Julianne Moore is brilliant. Joan Allen is brilliant. Clive Owen is okay.
Jennifer Jason Leigh,
is fine. I even liked her. I'm sure she was very happy for once not having to play the mentally ill sister. So I don't know what to tell you. I would recommend it if you like
that
this
sort
stuff.
Of thing.
If you like the supernatural and horror, there's also a weird monster that you sort of really understand a little bit in the end, but not completely. I recommend it because everything else about it was
Top
fantastic.
notch.
And again, it's like a worm. It just wormed itself into my brain and it just stayed there. It's still there. But if you have little patience with kind of the bullshit,
Like me.
the Stephen King bullshit of
I always
the
say
fantastical.
I always say that I would watch anything Julianne Moore does, but as it turns out, no.
Yeah.
I love her, but there's a
She was
limit to what I can.
fantastic in this.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of violence against her, but she, as Stephen King said, never is afraid. She's very strong, and she, you're impressed by her strength, and she uses it to.
So, do you think? Because I think Apple releases 3 episodes in the first, and then you have to wait every week.
Yeah,
Would
watch,
you recommend
watch
that
the first one at least, and if you like it, stay around for the next 2.
Well, but do you recommend that they wait and just binge on it?
Well, I think you should watch the first one and
To see if you even
decide
want to.
if you even want to. I would recommend binging because I can't imagine that I would have had to wait and watch this week
It's
by
a
week
mood
by
thing.
week. It's mood, very moody.
Okay, this is Lisey's story. It's available on Apple TV Plus, and you heard the whole gamut of emotions it elicited. Okay, this is a very quick review because we only watched the first one of these, so we can't really give you a full proper review. But we wanted to let you know it's available.
Are there 8?
7,
7.
I think, or maybe 8. But it's 7. It's 7 stories. I don't know if maybe there's an 8th when they round them all up together. But anyway, it's called Solos, Solos, on Amazon Prime now. Created by David Weil, who also created Hunters, which we loved.
Very much.
But wait till you hear the cast. Okay, so Helen Mirren, and I know I can stop right now.
For many of you.
Uzo Aduba, Anne Hathaway, Constance Wu, Sana Lathan, Nicole Bahari, Morgan Freeman, Dan Stevens, and Anthony Mackie. And so
All but one are solo pieces.
all but one was what?
Well, there's one that.
Oh, so maybe that's the 8th.
Yeah.
Okay. So these, again, as you can imagine, stories of different people who don't seem related, but somehow they are connected, and it's to me. So they all kind of happen in the future. Some of them in a very immediate future, like the first one that we saw with Anne Hathaway was 2025, which is very soon. So there is an element of. Again, I don't know what the rest of them will be. It's kind of futuristic, not just in the, okay, so it's 4 years from now, but for example, with Anne Hathaway, there's time travel. So I don't know what the rest of them will be. When I watched the trailer, I said, oh no, I'm not going to like this. There are too many, again, supernatural, fantastical, blah, blah, blah elements that I personally don't connect to. The only way that I usually manage to connect to these things is if they manage to make it not about that, but about the human experience within that context. And I find that they did manage to do that with Anne Hathaway. There were some original things about that episode. There were a lot of unoriginal things, unoriginal ideas about it too. I can't say that I was wowed by it, but it was only 30 minutes, which I think is a plus. You can't really
plus.
you can't really do a whole
solo. Well, she played herself at several time periods.
Right, that was actually a very good role for her because she got to play off against herself.
She was wonderful.
She was. She's a very good actress, and but again, I didn't find the idea to be that exciting or that original, but. It was fine. For again, like we said with Lisey's story, some things I come to for the cast. With this, obviously, a fantastic cast. I'm eager to see what they each have to do in their various, and hoping that because every episode is just one person, that they'll really get to play around and do something interesting, something that they don't usually get to do. I'm waiting for episode 3 with Helen Mirren.
And I love Sana Lathan and Constance Wu,
and Nicole
too.
Bahari. She's wonderful. So I think you should definitely check it out. Again, it's called Solos. It's on Amazon Prime.
Right, it won't even cost you anything if you're an Amazon
already
Prime member. Right. So you really have nothing to lose, but maybe a half an hour, and you can. If you're like me, you can do something else while you watch.
Well, that doesn't mean a lot for the. Yeah. Okay, and then finally we have a show that we recommended on social media for you last week, but I want to tell you a little bit more about it. because I really couldn't expand on Instagram. So it's called Black Space. It's on Netflix now. It's created by Anat Gafni and Sahar Shavit. So Anat is a woman. I don't know if Sahar is, but at least one woman. And starring, you won't know many of these people, so I will skip telling you the cast list. It's many of you are Israeli show fans, and as well you should be.
You should be,
because there's, and I'm not biased. There's excellent content coming out of Israel, and usually we're used to seeing Israeli content. Usually revolves around the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, or alternatively, if you've watched Shtisel and other things around
unorthodox,
the religious experience of being Jew, and this is a departure, and it's obvious that it was made with the international market in mind, especially the American market. But they managed to make it Israeli within that, and actually explain it even without really explaining it, being too blatant about it in the show. This is about a high school. There's a mass shooting in the high school, and the lead detective, the lead detective is a man. He has a co-lead detective who's a woman, and they work together to solve this mass shooting and find out what exactly happened. It's a seven episode drama. It's very suspenseful, very polished,
and very bingeable.
We binged it in 24 hours. I'm still processing the ending, because to me, the ending, even though it felt a little bit anticlimactic, when I thought about the conversations that they had, the explanations that they had as to how it happened and why it happened, I realized that actually they had a lot more to say. There were some really interesting ideas there that I didn't feel were fleshed out enough. Throughout the series. I wish they had been, because there were some really, really good ideas there about the difference in this generation, and what it means to grow up in violence, and what it means to be a teenager. We hear so much about, it's always
misery.
It's always been hard to be a teenager, but we hear more and more about how teenagers now, because of social media, because of the climate, the political climate in which many of our countries are, how hard it is to be a teenager, and what it creates within the societies, within high school cliques and all that. So there's
a lot of drinking, a lot of drugs.
Which is a theme that we see in a lot, no matter what country the movie or the show is.
Something we're going to tell you about next time has a lot of it in it, and it's just such a waste of young lives.
Well, but again, I think it says a lot about the desperation, about the, it's not easy being a teenager these days. So I think that they had a lot of really good ideas that were just kind of summed up in the end in final moments, and I wish that they had had more of that throughout the series. I mean, they did, but they didn't flesh them out enough.
No, because they would have revealed...
Perhaps. So maybe they needed an 8th episode to expand a little more about those ideas. But anyway, I loved it.
I loved it too, although I must say I found certain parts of it confusing. Why it happened exactly, who was involved, why they were involved.
But this is the sort of thing that even if the ending, I understand why you're saying that. I think that the ending didn't necessarily, wasn't necessarily the goal. To me, everything that we went throughout the 7th episode was interesting on its own, no matter how the story was resolved. So even if in the end it turned out a little bit confusing, which I agree with you, it was a little confusing, I still found that the journey there was so interesting that I didn't mind.
No, I didn't either, and all the acting was good. The kids were great.
Yeah. I think it's a very, very fascinating, pleasurable experience.
Certainly worth a watch, boy.
Yes. So this is called Black Space. It's on Netflix. So as you said, if you're already a subscriber, what have you got to lose?
No reason not to give it a go.
So check it out. And that's our podcast for this week. We're lining up things to tell you about next time. So make sure to come back and have a really, really good
Have a
week.
lovely week.
Bye.
Be safe. Bye.